This is Bill Ryan from Project Camelot and Project Avalon, and the date is the 16th of February 2010. And what they were talking about was a plan that had clearly been made a long time ago, and what they were discussing was the implementation of this plan. They were discussing how things were going. Then the next thing that happens in this chess game that's being played is that biological weapons are released on China. He heard this being discussed in this meeting. They will release a flu-like virus that will be genetically targeted against the Chinese population. It's racially targeted against the Chinese people. It's designed to spread like wildfire and to knock out a large number of the Chinese people. And these people in this meeting were laughing about this. They said, China will catch a cold. Those were their words. China will catch a cold. And they were laughing about the fact that these biological weapons will wreak havoc among the Chinese population. And after that, then what effectively will be a kind of plague will actually spread right across the world to the West as well. Our source was not clear whether this was a Chinese retaliation or whether the thing would just spread out of control in the way that it would be very understandable if it did, whether it's racially targeted or not. These things actually mutate. There's a pandemic that really is sweeping across the world and really is killing people very visibly. And you've got this totalitarian military lockdown in all the governments in the Western worlds because everyone's going to be in panic about all of this. And then, he said, then the real war starts. And at this point, I asked him, is this just about population reduction? What is this about? Why are they doing this? All of this stuff on the world. Why do it? He said, absolutely, it's about population reduction. So I said, well, in this meeting, did they mention any figures? And he said, yes, they did, 50%. Half the world's population. This is planned as per the Georgia Guidestones. For those of you who don't know what the Georgia Guidestones are, it's a stone monument in Georgia in America that was erected anonymously a number of years ago. It's in 8 languages, and it's like an Illuminati manifesto for a new world, as it were. And just hold that thought about this being a manifesto for a new world. This is an important concept here in what I'm presenting. One of the key parts of this manifesto for this new world is that there should be a population of 500 million people, understand. There's a plan, I believe, that Hitler would be proud of, which is so evil, it's so Machiavellian. Henry Deacon in 2006, he said that in his own inside information was that there would be a war against China in 2008. Now that didn't happen. He says that he's as sure as he can be that the people who are calling the shots in the world, you can call them the Illuminati, the controllers, the cabal, whatever name you have for them, they believe that there is going to be what he called a geophysical event, a major geophysical event. He says that the best information that he's got is that the insiders believe that this is going to happen, or they are concerned that this is going to happen. And many of you watching this will know that this isn't a completely crazy idea. There have been trillions of dollars that have been spent on deep underground bases for some reason which we don't know why it is. You'll know about the seed bank in Svalbard. This is in the public domain, where all the seeds of all the plants and all the crops in the world have been buried deep inside a granite vault in northern Norway. There are many precautions being taken as if something might happen that could really threaten some of these valuable resources, including the seed banks of the world. Now, if there is going to be a geophysical event as they believe. This is because it seems to be preserved Illuminati inside knowledge, whether it's true or not, that there are repeated cyclical geophysical events about every 11,500 years. Information about what really happened to Atlantis was very probably in the Great Library of Alexandria that burnt down a couple of thousand years ago. There are persistent rumors that much of that information has been retrieved and it's in the Vatican Library. This is information which is not in the public domain and which the insiders may have access to. Whether it's accurate or not, the important thing is to realize that they probably believe that this will happen and they're making their precautions. And this might be the justification for this insanity that we've just heard about in this plan. Consider this. He said, if there's going to be a major geophysical event, something like a pulse shift, maybe it's Planet X, maybe it's some kind of energetic phenomenon that the solar system is going to be moving into, that's going to somehow destabilize the Earth or the Earth's crust in some way. We don't know. But if there were to be a major emergency like that, something that would actually make a war look very inconsequential, the thing that will help the human race to survive it, or will help parts of the human race to survive it, is if there is already emergency preparedness in place before it happens. In other words, if you knew that there was an emergency coming, if you knew, for instance, that there's a hurricane coming in to hit your city, then you put all the emergency preparedness in place beforehand. You have the troops ready, you have the infrastructure ready, you have the military ready, you have everything that you need ready to handle this situation so you can respond and react and recover in the best possible way. Our source suggests that the reason for this whole Third World War scenario is that then the Western governments, with the Chinese out of the way, will be in a state of such totalitarian control of their own population that they will be best equipped to recover and rebuild the new world after a cataclysm. And he thinks that this is what's happening. And I have to tell you that this terrible logic makes sense to me, that they would think that way. I'm not for a moment agreeing that this will happen. I think this is wild, crazy stuff, but if they believe that it's going to happen, then this could be their justification for this kind of plan that we've heard about is really being discussed. And this now is my own speculation right now, which also makes sense to me. And I invite your comments and your thoughts about this. We need to work together to figure out what's happening here. It's called the AngloSaxon Mission. What that told me was that the reason for the name is because this is a white racist agenda for the inheriting of the new earth. It's a plan that Hitler would be proud of. If they think that a new earth needs to be rebuilt, a new world, think of that little phrase there. If a new world needs to be rebuilt after a cataclysm, they want the Anglo-Saxons to be doing it. They don't want the Chinese to be doing it. They get the Chinese out of the way first, and then the Anglo-Saxons will inherit this new world. We heard a few minutes ago, I was describing how Henry Deacon described that the war against China was meant to start in 2008. That didn't happen. A lot of people thought that was crazy. A lot of people thought he was crazy. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he heard something that was a real plan, but they're 2 years behind schedule, and maybe this will never happen at all. There are a number of other things that may have been planned and which have never transpired. It's very interesting to think about the so-called Mexican flu outbreak, the swine flu outbreak. For the last 6 to 9 months, we've been looking at a scenario where it looked as if they wanted to roll out vaccinations, they wanted a lot of people to get ill, they wanted to announce a pandemic. Even now, There have been proposals to extend this pandemic declaration for another 2 years, and nothing's happening. In England, we call it a storm in a teacup. There's nothing happening here. But maybe something was intended. Now, if it wasn't intended, it's possible that all of that could have been some kind of a test, just to see how people respond, to see how people react, to see how quickly it spreads, to see what the take-up of the vaccinations will be. And then, of course, us at Project Camelot and a number of other people who've been activists in this whole area trying to draw attention to all of this, now we're all on a database. They know who's going to stand up and start talking about all of this stuff. So it might have been an experiment, or it could have been a failed rollout of something. There's plenty of reason to believe that things are changing. This is the important thing. And those of you who've been following the work of David Icke, this is an important perspective here, because we support his work fully, in as much as he makes a beautiful presentation and he starts off by saying, we are infinite consciousness. There are many ways to put this, but it's very hard to disagree with that. We're immortal, godlike beings who've long ago forgotten what our power was. The potential of consciousness is enormous. It's very important to realize that how powerful we are may be the single most important component in this whole picture that enables us to save the day. This may be what it's really all about. Admiral George Hoover, who died in 1998, he was in the Office of Naval Intelligence in the US Navy. He talked to researcher Bill Burns, the editor of UFO magazine, and Bill Burns described this conversation with George Hoover to George Norrie from Coast to Coast AM. And what Admiral George Hoover told Bill Burns was the biggest secret according to what the American Navy had found out. Very, very interesting story. They were talking about the Roswell visitors, and Admiral George Hoover said that these visitors were us from the future. They were time travelers. They weren't extraterrestrials. Now, other researchers and whistleblowers have spoken about the same thing. And this is fascinating in itself. But what Admiral George Hoover said the biggest secret really was, it had to do with the abilities and the power of the consciousness of these travelers. Because they were us from the future, what the military authorities had found out was what humans are really capable of. And he said that this had been buttoned up really tight, because if we knew how powerful we really were, how powerful we really could be, then we would, in his own words, cause chaos around us, and this could never be permitted. We could rearrange the reality around us in the way that we wanted to, in the way that, if this is real, that the future humans have learnt how to do, which gives them access to these sorts of incredible abilities, such as time traveling. Philip Corso, in his book The Day After Roswell, described in some detail how his understanding was that the way the craft works was they were like an amplification of the pilot's own consciousness. It was their consciousness, it was their ability to travel and bilocate that was amplified by the craft, and that actually all of these abilities are basically abilities connected with the consciousness of the beings themselves. And if they are us, this is the message for all of us here. We're being deliberately dumbed down. Our food is being poisoned. Our children are being lied to in the schools. We're being fed propaganda in the media. We're being forced into this tiny little box. We're being kept busy with game shows and ball games, and we are discouraged from really finding out what it is that is our heritage on this planet. Eric von Däniken has just published a book which is called History is Wrong. There's so much which we are denied. George Green describes that we are known as the useless eaters, this surplus population of billions of people, with a tiny number of people at the top of the heap who are dependent upon us to police each other and to laugh at each other and to stop each other from getting out of line because we're encouraged to conform to how we're meant to be. And so there's this straitjacket that there's the opportunity for us to break out of, and it's this straitjacket which has been deliberately put in place by these very people who've been creating this plan. Where this plan originates from, it's very interesting to speculate. Our source told us that this has been in place for a long time. He'd first heard about the Anglo-Saxon Mission as long ago as 1976. The Illuminati symbolism about the dawn of a new day has been going on for a long time. Many people think that this plan requires such a superhuman level of intelligence and strategic understanding, and is so ruthless and so cold that the logic suggests, and David Icke says this, Jordan Maxwell says this, we say this ourselves with full agreement, that this didn't come from a human source. People aren't capable of doing this against other people. There's something else behind this. We have to think big. We have to think from the highest spiritual viewpoint that we possibly can do. That these people shouldn't be fought. What must happen is we just withdraw our consent from these things that are being done to us, from this plan that we're part of. And as I was saying just before, if you're in the military or if you're in intelligence services, withdraw your consent from this, because these plans can't happen without it. There's something about the Illuminati and the way that they're operating that is very limited. They're using force, they're in a box, they're trying to counter what everybody I know is recognizing and referring to as a huge expansion of consciousness all over the world, an expansion of awareness. We get emails every day from people, often very young people, who are saying, I can really see what's happening in the world. Tell me what to do about this, but I'm ready. I'm ready to do something. I'm ready to do whatever it was that I came here for. I don't know what that is yet, but I know that we've got big problems. 20 years ago, people weren't saying that kind of thing. There's a huge rollout of some kind of an expansion of consciousness. It's a morphic field that's growing enormously. And there's something that's changing. And my personal belief is that this is certainly being supported by benevolent non-human agencies, let me put it this way, who know about this kind of plan. They don't know whether it's going to happen or not, but they know that it's being planned. A lot of contactees, there's some channel information. You need to consider channel information extremely carefully. But there is channel information, and there are contactee reports that all talk about scenarios like this and how we must be wary, how we must be careful, how we've got to guard against it, how we've got to insure against it, how we've got to be prepared for something like this. And it's entirely possible that this increase in consciousness is happening in direct response with this escalation of violent, forceful plans. It's like, as I've often said in my own presentations in the past, it's a little bit like a movie script itself, where you've got everything building up to a climax of the forces of evil and the forces of consciousness just kind of getting ready for some kind of final confrontation. Now, I'm not trying to be biblical about this, and I know that this situation which I've just been describing is a little bit like the Armageddon War, but I do not believe that this kind of thing will actually come about. As I've said many times before, there's an interview which I did on Freedom Central, which you'll see on the Camelot site, where I say the single strongest reason that I have for not believing that anything is fixed, that we're all doomed, that anything really bad is going to happen, although I think we've got a lot of problems to solve, is because I wouldn't be here, and neither would you watching this now, I'd have incarnated on another planet. I'd have gone somewhere else. I'm not going to go and sit here in the firing line with no possible way of escaping. There's a job to do here, and many of you watching this will be aware of the fact that we're here to do jobs. It's what Dolores Cannon calls volunteers. We may be here for a reason. We may be here to help catalyze this increase in consciousness, and that's what's going to prevent this kind of thing from happening, because if we do not agree that this is the future that we want, then that's not what we're going to experience. We do all co-create our reality, we do all have a part in it, and I profoundly believe that by becoming aware of these plans, this is the way that we avert them. There's a difference between prediction and prophecy. These are two words in the English language that are easily confused with each other. Prediction and forecasting is saying, okay, in 3 months' time, this is what's going to happen because this is what the data leads us to conclude logically. That's all about forecasting and prediction. A prophet does something different, and it's a word to be used with care because it's often misused, it's often misunderstood, and it's like a biblical term, and some people react against it for that reason. But what a prophet always used to do was to say, listen, if we don't wake up and if we don't take action, then this is what's going to happen. And the purpose of the prophet giving this prophetic warning is not to warn people that it will happen, but to say, listen, you got to change something here. You got to change the way you're doing things. You got to change the way that you're being. You got to change the way you're interacting with each other. You got to change your whole attitude. Whatever it is that you change, then the purpose of the change is so that this prophesied event doesn't happen. And so what we have here is we have a kind of prophecy. It's not a prediction. And I'm using this word very, very carefully because the reason why I'm making this statement, the reason why we're releasing this information is to make sure that this doesn't happen. What are we going to do with this information? It's going to be translated into every language that we can. The video is going to be subtitled in Chinese, Arabic, Russian, Spanish, every other major language. I want this video to be picked up by the Chinese. I want this to be escalated up the line. The Chinese are very sensitive about videos that refer to them, especially ones with Chinese subtitles. This will be reported right up the line to Chinese intelligence, to the Chinese military commanders. And the reason for that is because, first of all, if this is nonsense, it doesn't matter, okay? But if this is a really serious threat, then those are the guys who need to know about it, because their first nuclear response, which is designed to be provoked, is the thing that actually sets this whole thing on fire. And so, to any Chinese military commanders who are listening to this, don't do it, okay? None of us must do anything here that is in alignment with their plans. There's a wonderful scene in the Avatar movie that I loved so much, which was when the woman helicopter pilot who was ordered to fire her weapons at the big tree, she's just about to fire, and then she says, I didn't sign up for this. And then she turns around and she goes home. She's not going to be part of this. There are many people in the military who never signed up for anything like this. There are many people in the intelligence services, they never signed up for anything like this. They signed up when they were young, thinking that they were doing the best thing for their country, thinking that they're doing the best thing for mankind. They're not all evil at all. And so as a direct message to those of you in the military and the intelligence services who may be watching this or may have had this brought to their attention, you don't have to do this stuff just because you're told. You need to support what's best for the human race. You don't need to follow orders if it's going to lead to a huge destruction here, which is in no one's interests apart from the controllers who have an agenda of their own And that agenda doesn't feature you and me, that's for sure. Okay.
What we don't know about the situation at Roswell is whether these were extraterrestrial, whether they came from a hollow earth, whether they came from another dimension. We don't know this, right?
We don't. The only clue that I had was from this naval officer. He was from the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, called George Hoover. We've talked about him before, who said that he was the Corso of the Navy, and that the military believed, and he said he knew, that these entities were not so much interplanetary, but they were literally time travelers. And the big secret is that they were us from the future, and that we and they had the same powers, and that was the real fear of the government, that we had the ability to manipulate reality around us. We've always had that ability. We just didn't know how to use it. And if we ever learned how to use it, and we're not ready for it, we would cause chaos. And that was the big secret that the Navy eventually found out.